Want to stop juggling spreadsheets, calendars, and a dozen apps just to run your rentals? Lodgify makes it easy. It's an all-in-one toolkit for hosts. Build a direct booking website, automate guest messaging, and keep all your channels in sync. Running your rental business your way has never been simpler. And for Good Morning Hospitality listeners, you can get 20% off any yearly plan with code GMH20. Just check the link in the show notes to get started today.
Welcome to Good Morning Outdoors, your one-stop shop for the latest news, noteworthy trends, and thought-provoking discussions across the outdoor hospitality industry. From campgrounds and RV parks to glamping, outdoor resorts, adventure travel, and ecotourism, we'll be discussing all things outdoor travel and hospitality, so join us on Good Morning Outdoors every Thursday, wherever you get your podcasts.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Happy Thursday, Matt.
We're supposed to get some rain. It's sunny out, so I'm grateful. We've had a few really nice days in upstate New York.
That's right. And usually I would be able to ask you, what have you been up to this week or what's been going on? But we were thankful to spend the week together, actually, down in the Catskills, preparing for the season. Obviously, we're getting close to May, T-minus about 40 days until we open that property. So working with Kate and Lewis and our whole on-site team there. Really interesting adventure and visit down there this time.
Yeah, well said. It's always a little bit of a nail biter when you start to come out of the spring on a seasonal property, heavily wooded, lots of trees. We've had some crazy wind, so I think we were both down there prepared to see some carnage with some trees, and pleasantly surprised to see minimal tree work and landscaping to get done before May. Still got our work cut out for us, which I was
going to say, I think we've got some photos here to share from the visit with some critters, I think, that are giving us a little bit of trouble. I guess this is what happens when you're waterfront camping.
Yes, and gives you a glimpse into the day-to-day of a campground owner. And so we have some beavers, and we've had to obtain a nuisance beaver permit and dam removal permit because it's incredible how quickly they can take down trees, big trees. They are damming up some part of the creek, creating ponds. It's obstructing access to certain campsites, and it's just one of those interesting things that we toured through a licensed trapper after we got our permit this week, learned a lot about beavers, had a nice kind of biology lesson, and super interesting, something we got to stay on top of there. And we also booked a fly fishing guide for a couple weeks, so we should have some really good content on fly fishing. We're planning some events in the early season. And what else? I don't know. What else did we get into down there?
Yeah, I think that's about it. I mean, the real test will kind of be when we start to turn the utilities back on, obviously begin to kind of remove all of the fallen trees, the branches, really just getting the property ready. We were working with, Kate, our manager there, on really just operations, getting all of our seasonal campers set and working through all of our systems and payments and accounts just to make sure we're all prepped and ready to go for the season. It's all the boring stuff behind the scenes that your campers never see. And many of you, hotel, campground, hospitality operators probably feel that and can relate to that very deeply. There's a lot of work that goes into things that your guests never get to see. So,
right,
yeah, a lot of great progress.
Fun part there though was scoping out and selecting sites for some new glamping tents. So we're starting with 6 glamping tents. So we're starting to prep those sites and strategically pick which sites we want to convert to glamping. So that's a lot of fun. Should change kind of the complexion of the property and give more access to different kinds of customers. So lots of fun.
Yeah, absolutely. And before we dive into today's news, just a reminder that if you are joining us on the live broadcast today, drop us a comment. Let us know where you're tuning in from. And as we go through the roster of news and stories, let us know if you have any questions or comments as we go through these. We'd love to hear your opinion and volley back and forth a little bit and see how other people have their take on what's happening in the industry today. I've got my coffee, Matt. Good morning brew here, and we're ready to go. So, all right, why don't you say we dive into today's first story, which really comes from Forbes. This was an article that came out a little bit earlier in the week. I saw it first initially on Woodall's, and then obviously we've had a number of folks in the industry traffic this story on social media, and found it on Forbes itself. Really about how glamping is reshaping luxury travel. Do you really want to set this up and give folks a little bit of background on how this was written and some of the information that was contained?
Yes. Yeah, I'd love to. I love digging into this stuff, and I'll try not to come off as too much of a pessimist or a naysayer. I think generally all the points in the article and the data is approximately reliable. And that's really the story of the industry, is that there really isn't any pinpoint accurate, reliable data in glamping. It's kind of an amorphous term in industry. It's super tiny, honestly, in the grand scheme of hospitality. It's growing. It's where there's tremendous growth. So that's where all the buzz comes from in glamping. But we've talked a little bit about the numbers in prior episodes. There's 7,000, 8,000 glamping units across the country, which is, it's minuscule compared to hotel rooms or even campsites. So, I'm torn. I look at these articles, and like I said, I don't see any problems with it per se. Some of the reports cited were from what I kind of call report mills, where they have
it's an unverifiable source in the sense of, these are likely not folks who are deep in our industry with a deep understanding of how glamping and outdoor hospitality really works.
Right. And so they sell reports for $3,000, $4,000, $5,000. They have a report for every single industry and niche you could ever think of. And how could you possibly be, an expert in every single business niche there is? When I see these things, I have a couple kind of business cliches and sayings that I keep coming back to. First one is cui bono. I love this. It means who benefits. I feel like, you should look at everything in life and in business to some degree with that lens of who benefits, who is this, coming from. And this is no shade at the author. Sure, he's a very intelligent and successful and business person that's doing everything the right way. He has a couple glamping locations that are due to open soon, and obviously probably studies it very closely. There's a lot we've talked all about the big players. We write about them extensively. The Postcard Cabins of the world, they had the big deal with Marriott. So obviously that's top of mind for everyone. I think there's this portrayal of the industry that it's like, to use some more business cliches, it's blue ocean or greenfield, and it's just endless opportunity. And there is a tremendous opportunity. We believe in it wholeheartedly, but I think there's also a lot of people that are going to completely lose their shirts on ill-fated glamping developments. It's location oriented, it's demand oriented, it's a small niche. There is tremendous demand that's outpacing supply, but that might be more about the supply currently than it is really about the demand. So I don't know. I don't have all the answers. I'm studying the industry every day. I just tend to look at these things with, questions, and I don't know. What are your thoughts, Alex?
Yeah, one of the data points that was cited in here that is definitely a projection is that they cited about $561 million was the size of the glamping industry in 2023, and a projected growth to 1.3 billion in 2029. I think that in some ways, because we don't have a lot of great glamping data available, it's projection and wishful thinking, in the sense of course, we all want the glamping industry to double over a 6-year period like that from 2023 to 2029. And that may become true. I do think it's true that glamping has really carved out a nice little niche in the luxury travel space in general. We see that, as you mentioned, Matt, with the Postcard and Marriott deal, the Auto Camp and Hilton. A number of these hotel brands are showing an interest into adding glamping into their mix of luxury accommodations and in different types of stays. I think that is a fundamental that will still hold true. And more hospitality brands will likely take notice. We've seen even KOA with their development of Terramore and, kind of planting their flag in the glamping space. And I don't think that that's going to slow down anytime soon. But your point about kind of, the blue ocean or greenfield, which I think is a great analogy, is true, that the fundamentals of your glamping property, if you're going to embark on a development over these next 6 years, need to still remain strong. You still need to pick a great major metro or a fantastic property to build your glamping property on. You still need to run a great business. And I really compare it to I think I mentioned this before we got on the show, on the politics side, everybody will complain on one side or the other, no matter who's kind of in the office. But most of what you can control in your life is something that you can control. I think that remains true for business. The macro trend is great. And obviously we want to continue to see the macro glamping industry continue to expand. We believe in it wholeheartedly. But most of the success that you're going to get is going to be from the success that you can generate for yourself within the business and the way in which you operate it. You operate it right with a great brand and a great concept, and the customers will come. There was a mention in this too about kind of sustainability and wellness. And I think, particularly on the wellness side, there is a great sort of advantage there if you're somebody who can capitalize on that. I think if you can engage in a nice concept that markets to those people and you build the business the right way, not just saying that you engage in wellness or wellness practices, but you really tailor the concept to somebody who wants to go camping and engage in those activities, you can take advantage of those trends. And there are likely a number of great customers and campers from across the country who would come to your property. So that's kind of my 2 cents, is that, look, there's a lot of great projection happening, not a lot of great data currently. If we do hit the 1.3 billion mark for the glamping industry by 2029, we'll all be thrilled. But in the meantime, if you want to engage in a glamping development or, plant your flag, do it the right way with the same business fundamentals you've always had, and don't kind of get lost in the weeds with, well, what does the macro trend say? Just run a good business and you're going to, come out on top, so to speak. Yeah, it's interesting. I just did a quick back of the napkin calculation here. If our data is right, that there's maybe approaching 8,000 glamping units in the country, and it's at 561 million. As of a couple years ago, even that's not even today's number. We're 2 years into that 6-year projection. Yeah. So that comes out to $70,000 revenue per glamping unit across the country. That's steep. That's steep. There probably aren't a lot of major metros where you can probably reliably hit that, as we've seen even just occupancy rates, particularly for things like midweek stays, drop. It's a problem, all operators and all of hospitality have, is, midweek stays are always harder. Right. That's a tall task. It's almost a $200 RevPAR. So wow. I don't know if I believe that, to be honest. Especially since we know probably a lot of glamping units themselves are backyard builds, so to speak. Yeah. And who knows? That could include experiences. That could include food and beverage. That could include a bunch of add-ons. And, you get these reports, and I did not pay the $4,200 for the report. So I've just seen what the free landing page shows you. But it could be like, sometimes it's based on like consumer spend of the travel, the road trip, the gas, the groceries, like everything that goes into a glamping trip multiplied by the number of glamping trips. You never know, like what is it actually based on? Right. That's a really great point. And so keeping on kind of the glamping and campground track, we had a number of awards released this week from some major players. CampSpot, which is a large, probably the largest campground reservation software provider in the space, released their 2025 best campgrounds and awards in North America. They broke it out into both on the US side and then the Canadian side as well. And then the Dirt, who most folks, if you're just even a consumer in this space, you may be familiar with them. They released their 2025 Glampy Awards, which fantastic name, and love the creativity in that. And they really highlighted the top 10 glamp grounds across the country. So we certainly are not going to break down and go category by category into all of these. CampSpot in particular has about 10 to 12 subcategories that they released. And that is not something that we'll embark on, but I think it's kind of well suited for us to look at what are some commonalities from a lot of these folks who won these awards, who were the type of properties that actually won this, and what does this really say about the travelers and what they want. Both CampSpot and the Dirt highlighted that this was not something that they just kind of came up with internally. There was, I'm sure, some kind of staff ranking or input on as to who to include, but they really touted that this was something that camper feedback and great comments about the properties in these awards is what really drove some of these properties over the edge to win the award for this year. So I think we can garner a lot from what does this say about particular campers and really this next generation of travelers and the type of properties that they're staying at. So Matt, what did you take away from both of these awards that got released earlier in the week?
Good question. So in the CampSpot Awards, like you said, tons of subcategories. I like that they diversified across the industry. There was glamping, there was RV resorts, there was tent camping, there was small campgrounds, medium campgrounds, large campgrounds. That being said, we did see a pretty, strong institutional representation within these lists.
We saw CRR, Great Escapes RV Resorts, Sun Outdoors and Sun Resorts, Yellowstone Properties by themselves, Team Outsider even I think had a location or two. I mean, a lot of big players for sure. And a lot of those properties have been on the system and are great partners with CampSpot for a while. If we think of Yellowstone and Sun and CRR, these are kind of ground level partners that really grew up on the platform.
Right. On the flip side, though, on the Dirt, I don't think there was a single institutional player represented on the glamping side, which ties back to our kind of earlier story.
Right.
Tiny industry. There are some institutional players. There's private equity, the under canvases, the postcard cabins, the auto camps of the world. There's representation there. I didn't see any of them on these awards. As mom and pop. More mom and pop locations, which I love it. We don't have anything against the institutional operators. They've done a great job. But I think it's a pretty accurate representation of how the industry, like campgrounds and RV parks consolidation has been underway for quite a while. There's real estate investment trusts and plenty of institutional players, not so much on the glamping side.
Right. And I would say it also kind of speaks to just the sort of flavor and brand of both of the platforms. If you think about what CampSpot does, they have their marketplace that attracts consumers, but ultimately they're a campground software provider. That's where they make, and even beyond campgrounds, they've gone into more lodging, and you can do a lot more with the platform now, but they're looking for those institutional big players that can, they can get a bunch of business from them and have a tight relationship, where the Dirt is really all consumer focused. Most of us may have the app on your phone. You're trying to find those unique mom and pop operators. And it's just, I think, a different appetite for kind of where consumers are going for what, and what really has kind of come out. I would say, obviously, all of these properties have a lot of different, amenities and offerings, and there really wasn't a lot of stuff we could begin to tie into each other. I would say from just the locational side, all of these parks were in really just even unique locations above just being in a great major metro. They were all researching like, wow, that's cool. Even if it was more of a destination like property out in the middle of nowhere. I think as we were both going through the list, you would come up on a property you'd never heard of before. And I was fascinated at least by, wow, this is a gorgeous piece of land, that I can see why so many people love to go visit there. So I think, as we just related back to the previous story, again, the location is key. Building a good business is key. Running great customer experience is key to be able to get good accolades and awards like this. So business fundamentals will continue to win. And I think that's been shown through both of these awards that came out this week. Anything else to add, Matt, before we move on to our next story here? A little bit more on the darker side?
I was just give a shout out to the beach camping area. That one really stood out to me in Conway, New Hampshire. It's kind of our style, on a river, in the woods, old fashioned camping. That's totally our flavor.
Yeah, absolutely. Launch Point's another great one out in California. That's fantastic. I mean, there were a lot of really well-deserved properties that got on this. So congrats to everybody who did get an award this year. And I'm sure more platforms and providers will continue to release kind of their version of this, as well as the OHI with their national awards in November. We'll be sure to give people their flowers and their cards as they come in. So to kind of switch gears here from more of the congratulatory side of the awards down to something, as I mentioned, a little bit darker. This is not exactly a dark story per se, but we saw a story again. I first saw this in Woodall's, but you could also find the story on Union Rayo about Congaree National Park in South Carolina announced that they are saying goodbye to RVs, and they are citing a lot of different reasons for this ban. This is a smaller property in South Carolina. This is by no means one of the gold star names of national parks. This is not a Yellowstone or one of the highly trafficked national parks per se, but they really cite lack of infrastructure, sound, roads, traffic, really the environment, and the way in which RVs are not really able to be accommodated or come into the property the right way was really what they cited, which I think is kind of an interesting claim to really say, look, we're playing the risk reward calculation here. We'd rather limit the amount of guests coming in with an RV to preserve the rest of the national park for other types of travelers. What did you really see in this story, Matt?
So when I first saw the headline, it evoked some emotion. It felt a little bit controversial.
Yeah.
But then when you dig in, it made sense. I mean, it's a tiny campground. It's 14 campsites. There's 2 campgrounds within this national park. One is completely just hike in. If you're bringing equipment, it's on your back.
That sounds like Covered Bridge a little bit.
Right. Yeah. So that's not even part of this equation. The campground that is affected is called Longleaf Campground within Congaree National Park. It's 14 campsites. That's it. And I went and looked at the pictures. It's dirt sites and dirt roads. It's a wet environment. It's just not made for RVs. It's also kind of sounds like Covered Bridge, where we accommodate RVs. We only have a couple sites that are really kind of make sense for transient RVs. There's one thing in the industry where if it's a seasonal or an annual or a monthly RV site, you can work with one of those more difficult sites because you park your RV there and you don't move it for usually quite a while. Totally opposite end of the spectrum is transient RVing, where it's constantly different sized RVs, different level of skill among the drivers. That's a huge concern among RV park owners is people are coming in at night. They might not be super experienced in backing in RVs or navigating campgrounds. So trees get hit, roads conditions, can deteriorate, especially in those wet environments. So, it's representative of the industry again, kind of like our prior stories is public campgrounds are not primarily, geared towards RVs. I think there was less than 100,000 RV sites at federal campgrounds, and only 2,000 federal campgrounds that actually have at least a single RV site. So it's, that's less than 10% of the, less than 5% actually of the total campsite supply across the country. So it's, it's to be expected. I think it's a micro kind of scenario of it's not built for RVs, so it makes sense.
Right. What I'll add to that is that it's interesting that this is kind of only happening this year, that this wasn't something that they had originally set up, knowing the layout and the structure of the property itself. And I think that's maybe what has led some people to be upset, is that, look, if the national park never opened with RVing, I don't think it would be a problem. They would have these great, hike in tent sites and great areas for folks to explore. And it would be, that's what the park would be known for. It's always a battle when you come out of the gate with something and have to kind of roll it back and take it away. You're going to get people that are upset about that because it affects them and they like that park or that area. I'll add that there are a number of great alternative properties nearby to this. Great Smoky Mountains National Park, Shenandoah Valley National Park in Virginia. I mean, there are some stunners here that have great RV sites for folks to visit as alternatives. I did see a number of folks as well on social media kind of ask the question of, is this a larger thing to come at national parks? And I think, as you laid out how this park has been laid out, likely no. And I think there's probably a bit of sensationalism there. But I think with the, what's been happening in California with the chassis manufacturer requirements and the sort of ban on diesel kind of regulations being in the works, as well as stories like this, even at smaller properties, it just leads some people to question and wonder, is this a broader trend to come in the realm of RVing? And is it going to be more difficult for RVers to park at national and state parks if regulations continue to become tighter? So certainly something to watch. I would venture to guess that this is kind of a one-off problem, at least for now. Certainly if more stories start to pop up where you have more existing properties that had RVing that now will start to take it away, you could see some problems there. But for now, this looks like it could just be a really regional issue at this park in South Carolina.
Agreed.
And speaking of folks wanting to travel and get to national parks and state parks, our next story comes from RVIA. They recently released their annual spring travel report. And although, Matt, we don't operate here now over the spring break time, it's still, although we had sunny weather this week, it's still a little bit cold in upstate New York, in the Midwest, in a lot of parks across the country. Spring break really has become really the pre-kickoff, I always say, to kind of the RV season. Most people kind of see it as Memorial Day or even early May to be kind of the thick or the meat of the peak season. But spring break for a lot of folks has become the time where they pull the RV back out again, de-winterize it, and hit the road again. And RVIA is estimating that about 14.7 million Americans plan to hit the road this year in their RV. And about 28 million Americans intend to actually just take an RV trip some point this year. So that's about half of the group that RVIA is estimating that will actually embark and take that first adventure now in the spring season. Obviously, this lends itself well to southern properties, western properties. There's a lot of inventory down there and a lot of really great parks. But really interesting looking at the type of people. They had a great kind of demographic breakdown from Gen Zers and traditional RVers kind of making up the bulk of those folks who are looking to take the spring break trip, which I thought is interesting. That's a lot of the maybe older traditional RVers who we know, retirees and folks who are doing their cross-country travel later in life. And then a lot of younger folks who are saying, look, like, I've been trapped inside. I'm ready to hit the road and go visit one of my favorite national parks or stay at really unique, cool places along the way. So I thought that was kind of a really interesting note, looking at actually who was taking the trip and what this says about who's actually willing to do spring travel.
Yeah, it's encouraging because there's been a narrative around the industry that the transient demand is suffering. So this was encouraging to read. We've seen it anecdotally in just conversations with people around the industry over the last few weeks. A lot of people traveling themselves out of the office, but reporting, good news at their parks, at their campgrounds, at their glamping properties, if they are in fact operating in the spring. So I'm encouraged by it. What was kind of eye-popping to me that 14.7 million number was actually specifically for spring break.
Right.
Which,
Well, and it's always interesting when RVIA releases these reports. They have a really good system to gather this data, and we trust a lot of the data that they're putting out there. I mean, they're really the authority figure when it comes to what's happening on the RV side. But you see that the language in this release about the 14.7 million Americans looking to travel for spring break is that they are intending to travel. This is by no means confirmed reservations that are happening or confirmed data after the fact, looking at, okay, how many of you now actually ended up taking the trip? So some of this always comes down to, is this aspirations that folks are seeing the warmer weather and saying, yeah, it would be great for me to get the RV out and take the spring break trip? Or how many of these folks will actually end up pulling the RV out, going on the first trip of the year in spring break season? But it certainly speaks to, you know, the amount of people who are raising their hand and saying, yeah, I still want to travel in my RV. And it's a good indication, as you mentioned, Matt, for demand coming up this year on the transient side, that look, if we can get people started and going and being outdoors using their units, you know, they're more likely to continue that journey throughout the rest of the summer. And it certainly strengthens the industry in a great sign for what's ahead coming up in 2025. And then we can end the show here as we sort of wrap up the news with a really kind of interesting news story. I think, Matt, you brought this to my attention. If anybody is familiar with the Yellowstone TV show, there's a really kind of interesting tie-in between Yellowstone and experiential hospitality. Matt, do you want to tell folks about that a little bit?
Yeah, so I guess not embarrassed to admit it. I consume Yellowstone in 1923 and the whole. I guess I'd call myself a Taylor Sheridan fan. I think he puts together good series. So notice it actually during the actual Yellowstone. So there's the Yellowstone series, and then there's the 1923 prequel series.
Right.
In Yellowstone, the one of the characters made a reference to experiential hospitality about their piece of Yellowstone getting developed, and, you know, developers kind of being sharks in the water to get their hands on some really special real estate. So I thought that was interesting. And, now it's been a few episodes now on 1923 with references to it. So I have to deduce that Taylor Sheridan or one of his writers are, students of the hospitality industry, because it's come up over and over again. There was a couple episodes ago. There were some miners, Danish miners in the show that were skiing down a hill in Yellowstone, and Timothy Dalton, famous as James Bond, is a sort of a villain character in this 1923 series, and he didn't know what skiing was, which is kind of an inside joke, I guess, because he's famous as a skier in James Bond. But he sees it and he goes over and asks the skiers to explain, and he immediately gets this idea that I can sell this for a fortune. And then it, proceeds on to the next episode, and there's a scene where he's got a group of investors all in their tuxedos. They're all drinking scotch and smoking cigars, and he's making this investor pitch about a ski resort in Yellowstone, which I just thought was funny. And he has this quote where he says, an experience is a good thing to sell because it costs nothing to make because it already exists, which that can be, I think anyone in the hospitality industry would say, hold on a second there. It's blood, sweat, and tears and payroll and people resources all go into creating an experience. But I think it's representative of the times where manufacturing and creating things is, more the foundation of the economy. And that's really hard to do that, people in factories and whatnot. So comparatively, yeah, that makes sense. But just thought it was worth mentioning because, kind of a modern,
really, really great pop culture moment,
yeah,
in one of the most kind of highly trafficked and watched TV shows of our time today. So look, the experiential hospitality bug it's catching fire a little bit. We're going to have everybody saying it in the industry coming up in the next couple of years.
Definitely.
And then as we wrap up, just want to thank Jackson. Thanks for tuning in from Fort Myers, Florida with us today. Absolutely gorgeous, I'm sure. And yeah, appreciate everybody who tuned in live to watch on the live broadcast. If you have any info or news stories that you think would be great for us to cover, we'd love for you to shoot us an email, goodmorning@hospitality.fm. As always, we'll see you back here next Thursday, 10 a.m. Eastern, for another great episode of Good Morning Outdoors. Get outdoors. Hope everybody has a great week, and we'll see everybody soon.
Want to stop juggling spreadsheets, calendars, and a dozen apps just to run your rentals? Logify makes it easy. It's an all-in-one toolkit for hosts. Build a direct booking website, automate guest messaging, and keep all your channels in sync. Running your rental business your way has never been simpler. And for Good Morning Hospitality listeners, you can get 20% off any yearly plan with code GMH20. Just check the link in the show notes to get started today.